esteemed members of the Parliament, President of Cyprus Academy of Science, Letters and Arts, President Nikias, former Chairman of the USC Board of Trustees, esteemed speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and an honor to welcome you all to today's conference. As humanity in the present age, we now possess the tools and capabilities to produce within moments the volume of information that once required a century to generate. What is truly striking, however, is that the human mind itself has not changed, not evolved, for more than 50,000 years. This paradox, if we may call it that, between our technological advancements and our unchanged mental capacity defines the very essence of our time. On the one hand, we are driven by an unrestrained tendency to create and to absorb vast quantities of information. On the other hand, we struggle to integrate this flood of data into meaningful understanding through focus and reflection. And yet, could it be that this very paradox is what fuels our economies, drives politics, and ultimately shapes our identity as members of this digital society? I believe that what truly distinguishes us lies partly in the means we have at our disposal to engage with the world of information, and partly in our ability to classify and prioritize it according to our levels of attention. The theme of today's conference, originally conceived under the title Fake, inspired by terms such as fake news, fake crowds, deep fakes, and fake impressions, relates precisely to the diffusion and increasingly to deliberate creation of information. These informational falsehoods have constructed an illusory world of knowledge, one that many people willingly enter in order to acquire a sense of identity. In going so, they contribute, often without realizing it, to the formation of what we might call an artificial democracy. Perhaps then an alternative title of today's gathering could be Intentional Falseness and Artificial Democracy. In a recent newspaper, an article of a very good friend and professor reflected on the Homeric distinction between intelligence and prudence. Homer, many centuries ago, warned of the dangers of machine learning systems, a warning that echoes today in the words of Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of artificial intelligence, who cautions us about the perilous environment into which humanity has so eagerly and swiftly integrated itself. Homer recognized that machines, no matter how intelligent, cannot comprehend the moral world, the moral rules of the world, the values and principles that govern human societies. This understanding is a uniquely human faculty, one that takes shape through social interaction and political experience. Artificial intelligence systems learn and process data. They surpass us in a speed and complexity of analysis. Yet, intelligence alone, detached from prudence, can become potentially dangerous. For this reason, we must find a way either to inoculate these systems with prudence or to deprive them of it so that humanity continues to prevail in one dimension that truly differentiated from machines. In democratic governance, political decision-making requires rational thought, prudent citizens, and an understanding of the moral and social order of the world. Effective communication within a democracy must be marked by reliability, logical coherence, and emotional resonance. It is precisely for this reason that false news, the fake news, is often wrapped in emotional intensity, designed to spread rapidly and to capture the attention of ever wider audiences. Political parties, the essentially representative cells of society within a democracy, now operated in an environment shaped by AI and unlimited access to information. This environment, however, indirectly challenges the norms of traditional representation. As a result, it promotes the seductive idea of direct participation through digital referenda and instant online opinion polls. What is truly at stake, however, is the very existence of political parties, not as we judge them today, but in their fundamental role as instruments of social representation. Such developments could, in time, lead to a historical questioning of democracy itself, and to the risk that any reasonable observer can easily foresee. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Executive Director of the Foundation of Parliamentarism, allow me to express my deepest gratitude to all the speakers participating in today's conference, especially to our distinguished guest of honor, President Nikias, and to all of you present here today for honoring us with your presence. I would also like to extend special thanks to the President of the Academy of Science, Letters and Arts, and to the President of the Standing Committee for Foreign and European Affairs for their unwavering support, as well as for the presence of the USC luminaries. I wish you a fruitful and inspiring conference. Now we go on with the welcoming remarks by Mr. Charidis Georgiadis. Mr. Charidis Georgiadis is a member of the Parliament, President of the Standing Committee of Foreign and European Affairs, and Chairman of Kliridis Institute. Mr. Georgiadis.
Thank you, Dionysos, ladies and gentlemen. I am here in my parliamentary capacity, but as was mentioned, I am also chairman of the Kliridis Institute. Glafkos Kliridis was the first speaker of the Cyprus House of Representatives, the founder of my party, and who subsequently went on to serve for 2 terms as president of Cyprus. He was also a decorated World War II veteran with the RAF. His plane was brought down over Germany. He parachuted out of a burning plane, barely escaping with his life. He was imprisoned, escaped, arrested again, kept in solitary confinement. In 1983, he was running for the first time for president. And the day before the election, an opposition newspaper came out front page with a story backed supposedly by documents that he was in fact an agent of the Nazis. There was no social media back then that could be used to refute the story, no private television or radio, and no time for the pro-Kliridis press to come out with their version of the story. By the time he could respond, the damage was done, even though his chances of winning those elections were probably slim anyway. It was without saying that the story was completely fabricated, as was admitted in court later. It was also revealed that the East German embassy was directly involved in this early example of disinformation which interfered with a democratic electoral process. Ladies and gentlemen, disinformation in its various forms and manifestations, deception, propaganda, is not a new phenomenon. It has probably been around since the beginning of history. In school, we were taught how the Greek general Themistocles spread false information to deceive the Persians and to lure their fleet into a trap which led to their defeat in the Battle of Salamis. Ages later, in 1835, the New York Times carried a story claiming that life on the moon had been discovered in what became known as the Great Moon Hoax, one of the most famous examples of disinformation. But it is usually in authoritarian and autocratic regimes where disinformation is extensively used as a tool to control society, as a tool against democratization. Ladies and gentlemen, it is once again authoritarian and illiberal forces, both foreign and domestic, which are using disinformation in what seems to be an open challenge against our liberal democracies. And what gives them the means to do so much more effectively than ever before is the digital revolution, the rise of social media, and the now of artificial intelligence. This explosive combination of resurgent authoritarianism with the technological and digital revolution makes this challenge to our democracy an unprecedented one. It is eroding trust, confidence in our institutions, in our democratically elected leaderships, in the media, in academia, in science. If unchecked, the consequences could be unimaginable. Our democracies should fight back and should defend themselves. But to do so, we must first figure out how, and we must do so urgently. And this is exactly why today's conference is both timely and important. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the speaker and the members of our House of Representatives, I would like to congratulate the organizers on their initiative and to thank the distinguished panelists for their participation. Special thanks, of course, to everyone who has traveled from abroad to be present today. I am confident that through the deliberations, we shall gain a better understanding of this challenge. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Georgiadis. We now go on with our guest speaker, Chrysostomos Nikias, served as President Emeritus and Life Trustee Malcolm R. Curie Chair for Technology and the Humanities, University of Southern California. His intervention title is Safeguarding Elections Against Cyber Threats in Democracy. President.
Thank you, Dionysios. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's just imagine for a second a world where the will of the people, once the unquestionable cornerstone of democracy, echoes through ballot boxes, only to be drowned out by digital shadows, which actually, Dionysios, I really like that. How you name this event, the conference, the digital shadows. These shadows cast by unseen digital weapons, intent on reshaping not just outcomes, but the very essence of our shared trust in democracy. Today, as the echoes of recent electoral battles still resonate, we need to confront this specter, the cyber threats imperiling our democratic societies. It is not merely a technical challenge we face, but a moral imperative as well to safeguard the sacred right of elections, ensuring they remain true reflections of the people's will. So in the moments ahead, I will address these perils discuss their architects and arsenals, describe, hopefully, a blueprint of defenses, and suggest a path forward for the future of our democracies. And I would like to congratulate Dionysios Alexiou for bringing us here today to discuss this important topic. As Mr. Georgiadis already pointed out, unfortunately, misinformation, fake news, rigged elections are as old as the Athenian democracy, 2,500 years ago. For example, one of its messiest facets was the so-called ostracophoria, which was an election to ostracize an individual from the city. If a person received 6,000 or more votes in the ancient Athenian democracy, he was banished from the city of Athens for a period of 10 years. So, the same way that Themistocles used misinformation to lure the Persians in the Straits of Salamis, unfortunately, it is believed today that he was also a victim of misinformation later, after the Battle of Salamis. So in the case of ostracophoria, no appeal to any court was allowed. The vote was final. However, the Spartans feared the charismatic leader of Athens, Themistocles, so much so that they began a misinformation campaign against him with unfounded allegations, similar to the fake news that we have today, which unfortunately found fertile ground among the Athenian citizens. So Themistocles was ostracized and eventually exiled from Athens. And of course, as we know from history, he never returned back to Athens. This is the leader who saved the young democracy of Athens by orchestrating and winning the most decisive battle of Western civilization, the battle in the Straits of Salamis. Well, I believe it was 15 years ago. Recent archaeological evidence, however, hints that Themistocles' ostracism might have been rigged. Citizens voted by scratching the name of the person they wanted to ostracize on a shard of pottery, sometimes adding nasty comments. And you can see the shards of pottery over there with the name of Themistocles. Well, thousands of pottery shards were found recently in one archaeological dig, in a well on the north slope of the Acropolis, with the name Themistocles. There were more than a couple of thousand. However, a reliable forensic examination of the shards concluded that they were written by the same hand, by one person. So they are exhibited today, if you visit Athens, at the Museum of the Ancient Agora, and I show some pictures of that here. So yet, in this digital age, where digital algorithms orchestrate our civic tasks, from seamless voter registrations to instantaneous result tallies, technology has become the enabler, but also the Achilles heel. So what I will also focus particularly in my talk a little bit later on the double-edged sword that we call today artificial intelligence. So let us begin with the stark realities. According to America's Cyber Defense Agency, the election infrastructure constitutes one of the most critical national assets. Yet, it remains a prime target for interference and may undermine public confidence, operational continuity, and outcome legitimacy. Consider the cascading effects for a minute. A single breach during an election process can demoralize thousands of citizens, amplify divisions, or fabricate narratives that sway undecided voters. As the International Foundation over Electoral Systems notes, vulnerabilities span people, they span processes, they span technology, demanding a holistic defense. Without proactive safeguards, we risk not just to end up with altered results, but a profound erosion of faith in democracy's machinery. The challenges are multifaceted, and at the core are direct assaults on the infrastructure, hacking into voter registration databases to manipulate rolls or deploy denial of service attacks that cripple voting platforms, rendering them inaccessible during peak hours in an election day. These tactics, as evidenced even in 2024 incidents across multiple democratic countries, transcend multiple lines, shaking voter trust irrespective of party affiliation. Disinformation campaigns exacerbate this, flooding social media with fabricated narratives to polarize electorates. Inside the threats compound the peril. Phishing schemes during an election period, targeting election officials, they extract their credentials while outdated IT legacy systems that are lacking modern encryption serve as low-hanging fruit to be exploited. So the question is, who are the bad actors? And there are 4 state bad actors for our democratic societies. Either we like it or not. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, whose operations blend cyber skills with geopolitical ambition. Russia, for example, with its storied playbook, even from the 2014 Crimea cyber attacks, targets consistently Western democracies to inflame divisions. Recall, for example, the 2016 Democratic National Committee, the DNC hack, and WikiLeaks of the Hillary Clinton campaign at that time. In 2024, Russia-funded networks paid Moldovan influencers to undermine pro-EU candidates, a tactic that recurred again this year during parliamentary polls. China's strategy is subtly a little bit different, pivots amplifying self-serving narratives through bots that infiltrated, for example, in the states of Alabama, in Texas, in Tennessee, and though with social feeds, and this happened last year, shifting focus from presidential to local congressional races, aligning narratives with Beijing's ambitions on trade and tech. However, China also had presidential campaigns in the past of both John McCain and Barack Obama, even back in 2008. Iran, via the Islamic Revolutionary Guard linked proxies, employs hack and leak operations to plant discord, as indicted in 2024 last year through US efforts, earning joint sanctions for Iran and Russia. North Korea plotted hybrid assaults for the 2024 disruptions in the United States. Influence campaigns, weaponized social media with propaganda, deep fakes, fake news, and bots all over social media. And of course, there are also the non-state actors. And these are the young individuals all over the world. The majority of them are brilliant computer scientists in their 20s or early 30s. They are all very young. And they are the hackers of very different systems. And of course, through their efforts, that leads to a further chaos. So, let me give you a few more examples. In 2020 elections, Microsoft detected attacks against both the Biden and Trump campaigns and leaked them to Russia, China, and Iran. In 2017 in France, the Macron campaign faced cyber attacks and campaign leaks, and they were all Russia attributed, to influence the outcome of the presidential campaign. However, Macron's campaign came up with a very effective defense tactic. They announced that they had seeded their own servers with fake documents and emails. The campaign did that and announced it. So as a result, the reporters receiving stolen files from the hackers could no longer be sure what was true and what was fake. So they tended to ignore them. Another example, in 2019, Indonesia was paralyzed by breaches and cyber attacks which exposed millions and paralyzed the country. And UK's 2016 Brexit endured foreign disinformation. And more recently, we witnessed Romanians' Russia accusations, and that happened last year. So the question is, how do we defend ourselves and our societies? So to counter all these cyber threats, we must erect multi-layered frameworks. Let us first examine technological safeguards, which must form the bedrock of election security. Implementing, for example, which is the most important by far, is the implementation of end-to-end encryption for all voter data transmission to ensure that intercepted communications remain secure. Blockchain technology, with its immutable ledger, can secure, for example, vote tallies, rendering tampering detectable and reversible. Artificial intelligence-driven anomaly detection systems should monitor networks in real time, identify phishing attempts, or distributed denial of service attacks before even they cascade. Moreover, adopting zero-trust architectures, where no device or user is inherently trusted, coupled with multi-factor authentication and regular penetration testing, will harden systems against insider threats. These tactics, when integrated into election infrastructure, transform potential weaknesses into fortified defenses. Equally vital are policy strategies that provide the framework for protection. Governments must enact comprehensive legislation mandating cybersecurity standards for election machine network vendors, including mandatory and frequent audits and liability for breaches. Intensive cybersecurity training of all people involved, and even during election days, volunteers to be trained in this area is equally important. So international alliances and bilateral pacts like those between the United States and the European Union partners are very important to counter state-sponsored hacking through shared intelligence and coordinated responses. The private-public partnerships should channel resources into resilient infrastructure, and with government funding allocated at the state level and municipality level upgrades, and of course the workforce training. Finally, transparency policies requiring post-election debriefs and public reporting on the threats will cultivate voter confidence by signaling vigilance. So, are we done? The answer is no, because now we have the emerging, particularly AI-based technologies that introduced an extra level of complexities in this area. The artificial intelligence's capacity to generate hyper-realistic deep fakes with synthetic audio and video and automated bots orchestrate targeted disinformation campaigns to manipulate the opinion of voters and their sentiment. AI-based systems write highly persuasive messages posted on social media platforms that can be weaponized to amplify misinformation. How do we safeguard against all these AI threats? Is by deploying advanced AI detection systems, leveraging machine learning to identify the synthetic media, and also identify changes in facial microexpressions and audio spectrograms. But what is really lurking in the horizon is one more, what I would refer to as existential escalation. And this is the advent of quantum computing, which is poised to shatter the cryptographic foundation upon which our cybersecurity systems and the electoral security rests. We are not done yet with quantum computing, but as quantum processors mature, exemplified by the recent industrial advances, their capacity to execute the so-called Shor's algorithm threatens to decrypt the public key systems like RSA, ECC, Diffie-Hellman in minutes, when the current computing power may require billions of years. The US Department of Homeland Security recently warned of this asymmetric peril, urging post-quantum cryptography migrations to avert what they refer to as the quantum apocalypse. So the quantum computing clock ticks. How do we prove ourselves and our ballots before the code cracks? Well, I hate to say it, but at the end we may be forced to go back to the paper ballots and just phoning our results to the election centers. In other words, we may be forced to go to the very old ways how we were counting votes, unless we come up with countermeasures when we face the peril and the apocalypse of quantum computing, where it can do computations faster than our existing computing infrastructure. So in conclusion, as we stand at the digital crossroads, We need to embrace the spirit of innovation and collaboration that has always defined our societies, fortifying our elections against the shadowy of cyber threats with cutting-edge technologies, vigilant watchdogs, and a strong chain of global partnerships. For every cyber threat measure, there is a countermeasure to block it, and it is an ongoing, never-ending battle. We have the tools. We have to remember that we have the tools, we have the talent, and we have the tenacity to outsmart the bad actors. And by investing in robust cybersecurity technology and education, and by fostering international alliances that share intelligence in this area, we not only protect our democratic elections, but also elevate our democracies to new heights of integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, President Yes. We now go on to our next speaker. Adam Clayton Powell III is Executive Director of USC Election Cybersecurity Initiative, Director of Annberg Center Washington Programs, USC Annberg Center on Communication Leadership and Policy, and co-host of White House Chronicle, weekly on PBS, Sirius XM and VOA. Adam?
Thank you for inviting us, thank you for hosting us, and thank you for your attention to this important topic. As the program indicates, this is going to be my section of this broad topic. This is who I am. I'm going to go through a number of slides very quickly. I'm happy to send these to anyone who wants them. So please feel free to send me an email. You'll have my email address at the end. There's a joke in the United States, and perhaps here, that sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be smart. And we've been very lucky. This was at a meeting just over 10 years ago in our office in Washington, D.C. And this person wrote the first code to create the internet back in the 1960s. His name is Vint Cerf. And in this meeting, he ended by saying, you should start a project on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, huge topic. He said, well, make a start on it. He's a vice president at Google. He said, we'll give you a little bit of money. So my appointments were in engineering and communications, and so I said, okay, we'll start something with those two schools. A few months later, still 10 years ago, I met this person, Max Nikias, at a conference in China, and he said, tell me more about the cybersecurity project. And remember, he said, you're thinking too narrowly. This is going to be huge. This is not just engineering and communications, this is public policy, this is the business school, this is the political science, let the law school know what you're doing. And I think, Max, my first reaction to you was, you really want me to report to 4 deans? And you said yes. The result is that the very next year, 2016, when the first cyber attack that we know of occurred on an American election, we had a team ready to go to defend against cybersecurity threats. We were approached first by the Democratic National Committee, which was the target of the attack, and then later by the National Governors Association, of all the 50 governors of all 50 states in the United States. They came to us and said, we actually run the elections in the United States, please help us. And so with the National Governors Association, and then with more money from Google, we set up programs in each and every one of the 50 states to train election officials, campaign workers, and public interest organizations on cybersecurity. What we discovered, because most of the people we were talking to had no computer science or IT background, and so we were told, focus on 3 basic topics: basic cybersecurity, which Max just covered, resilience and recovery, because so many of you will be successfully targeted, you have to know how to recover, and misinformation and disinformation, which became more and more important. And some questions began to come up very quickly with misinformation and disinformation. Well, what is allowed? What kind of misinformation is allowed? What kind of information is permitted? Is hate speech permitted? And the answer is very different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Let's talk about the EU. The EU has a specific mandate to combat hate speech. All forms of hatred and intolerance, incompatible, hate-motivated crime and speech are illegal under EU law. Not necessarily the case in the United States. In the UK, hate speech definitely is against the law. There's an Irish comedian who was arrested at Heathrow Airport last month. And the question there is satire hosted on the internet, is satire protected? Probably not in the UK, but it did prompt a furious backlash among many artists and writers. So now, again, why would this not be the case in the United States? We not only have certain hate speech that's allowed, we even have actions that are permitted. This is a demonstration by neo-Nazis in a Jewish neighborhood. And look what happens. After the march was initially canceled, the American Civil Liberties Union took up the case, and at the urging of a Jewish lawyer who defended the neo-Nazis' right to assemble in a Jewish neighborhood, even though they knew this would be highly, highly offensive. How could this be permitted? And the answer, you have to go back to the very beginnings of the United States. The First Amendment to our Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting free exercise, abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to assemble or petition the government. So in this U.S. national jurisdiction, we have what may be uniquely broad protections of political speech, and political speech is especially broadly protected. So can you make speeches that include disinformation and misinformation? That's political speech. Is it protected? There's a debate. Here's a case study from our 2020 election. What Russia started to do was to employ American citizens, U.S. citizens, some of them willingly, some of them some of them knowingly, some of them not knowingly. And they had them repeating Russian disinformation. If a U.S. citizen engaging in political speech repeats Russian disinformation, is that allowed or is it not? There's a debate. We have a newspaper in the United States. When I was growing up, you'd see it on the newsstands, the Daily Worker, communist newspaper, repeating Russian propaganda. It was on the newsstands. What about China Daily? It's a paid insert into American newspapers with news content produced in China. That's allowed. So now we come forward, as this debate continues, to our election last year. And we see, page 1 of the New York Times, a very good story on how county clerks and secretaries of state, remember, elections in the United States are local, they're not national. We have local elections. We have more than 8,000 local elections in the United States in election districts, and then we total up the results. Well, the county clerks and the secretaries of state running these elections, they were flooded by conspiracy theories and other misinformation, and they're saying, help us to protect the integrity of elections. Also last year, Iran used this relatively new technology to try to influence the elections. Again, they're not trying to change the election results. They're trying to reduce confidence in democracy itself. So they post fake news articles. They post fake information. This should be illegal, right? Okay, up to a point. Again, last year, a fire hose, this is what one government report called it, a fire hose of anti-Semitic information from China pointing at Republican legislators. This sounds like it should be illegal. So, what happened? I know this is a lot of small print, but the US government began to say, this is verbal terrorism. This is a threat to the United States. We have to take action. And so, in addition to the defensive measures, which Max Nikias discussed, the US government decided to take additional actions. The question is, did the US go too far? Well, under EU rules, the US didn't go too far, because consider the EU has banned Russia Today and Sputnik, two of Russia's major international media networks. They banned Russia Today and Sputnik because they say it is necessary to counter Russian propaganda. So how did the United States, with our First Amendment, counter Russian propaganda? Well, we have from Google, this is a quote from a letter sent by lawyers from Google. They apologize because they think they went too far to combat Russian propaganda. They said they blame it on the administration, on the White House, saying the administration's officials created a political atmosphere that sought to influence the actions of platforms, meaning how Google and others were editing social media. So Google now thinks that may have gone too far, saying it is unacceptable and wrong when any government, including the Biden administration, attempts to dictate how the company, meaning Google, moderates content, how they edit content on the websites, and how the company has consistently fought against these efforts on First Amendment grounds. So Google seems to say that the US went too far last year. So now there's a reaction. The Trump administration is reducing oversight. The 10-year-old law that enabled CISA, which is a government agency, which is a central agency in combating hackers and disinformation. The 10-year-old law has ended. It was allowed to end. And you can see the date on this, October 3rd. It just ended. The US State Department closed its office that countered foreign disinformation. That office is closed, been disbanded, its efforts are all gone. The department said, ceased all frameworks countering foreign state information manipulation. So that's, again, a major reaction. Has the US gone too far in the other direction? Well, for our national elections next year, the US may deploy anti- or disinformation defenses that are weaker than are deployed in European countries, in the EU, and in some other countries in other parts of the world. Is this going too far? Again, there's a debate in our Congress, there's a debate in our politics. But here's what's at stake. And just to give a few examples from what Dr. Nikias told us. This was in multiple tests run by the Washington Post Now, this is very recent. This was last year. The chatbots that include some of the most widely used chatbots in the United States, using Amazon Alexis, could not give the correct answer when asked who won the 2020 election. Now, there is one certified winner of the US election in 2020, it's Joseph Biden. But there's enough disinformation out there that AI is incorporating the disinformation into its models, and now some of the chatbots say, we don't know who won. But historically, there's one winner. But how do we know what's true?